When I look at the development of Gothic Remake, the first thing that comes to mind is that this is not a simple project of remaking an old game with pretty graphics. It feels much more like an attempt to touch a classic piece of work without losing the identity that made it remembered to this day. And this became even clearer after the demo. What I felt was that the team did not want to just modernize for the sake of modernizing. They tried to understand what still works in the original Gothic and what needed to be adjusted so someone today could enter this world without suffering right from the start. At the same time, it is noticeable that development was not an entirely straight path. The very way the demo was received showed that the game was still being polished, and that honestly gives me a feeling that is half positive and half cautious. Positive because they listened to criticism. Cautious because remakes of cult games always run the risk of overdoing the changes or being afraid to change too much. Gothic was never a smooth franchise. The original had a harsh atmosphere, a strange pace, and a progression that required patience. So when I see the remake trying to make everything more accessible, I understand the intention, but I also stay alert so as not to lose precisely that rough personality that made the game stand out. This tension between respecting the classic and modern adaptation became very evident. For me, this is the biggest challenge of the entire project, making the player feel like they are entering Gothic, and not just another generic fantasy RPG with a famous name. I also find it interesting that development went through this phase of listening to the community. This shows that the team knows they are dealing with a game that has very specific fans, people who do not just want nostalgia, but want to see the essence alive again. And honestly, this increases my confidence more than those campaigns that try to sell everything as the definitive remake before even showing anything real. My impression is that Gothic 1 Remake is being developed with more awareness than haste. I still see risks, especially in the combat, pacing, and atmosphere, but I also see a project that understands the weight of the name it carries. If they maintain this care until launch, it could turn out to be a very interesting remake, precisely because it does not try to be perfect, but rather tries to be faithful to the spirit of the original without being stuck in the past. The story of the remake managed to capture the dark and oppressive essence of the 2001 original, but with a more immersive and cinematic narrative approach that works very well in Unreal Engine 5. The premise remains the same, one that made us fall in love with the classic game. You are a nameless protagonist sent to the mining valley, a penal colony created by King Robar II to extract magical ore needed to forge weapons against the orc invasion. But something goes terribly wrong when the magical barrier preventing escape spins out of control. What impressed me most in the demo was how they managed to maintain this atmosphere of despair and claustrophobia, even with modern graphics. The playable prologue, called Nyress Prologue, is not exactly part of the main story, but it serves as a perfect introduction that places you inside the world of Murtana before you even take on the role of the unknown hero. This decision to tell a small separate story before the actual beginning seemed very smart to me, because it psychologically prepares the player for the dark tone that permeates the entire game. The developer truly listened to community feedback after the first demo, which was received very negatively due to clunky combat and stereotyped dialogue, and this is reflected in the current narrative. The dialogues in the current demo felt much more natural and less forced, which makes all the difference when you are trying to get emotionally involved with the story and characters of the mining valley. What worries me most, honestly, is whether they will be able to maintain this narrative quality throughout the entire game, because the demo is relatively short and focused. The original story of Gothic 1 was so rich in details, factions, meaningful side quests, and memorable characters that I fear the remake might oversimplify some elements to fit the expectations of a modern audience. On the other hand, seeing the kingdom of Murtana rebuilt from scratch with current technology, with more detailed scenery, and an environment that genuinely feels alive, gave me huge hope that the narrative experience will be even more impactful than the original. The magical barrier holding the prisoners, the tension between the different factions inside the colony, the corruption and hopelessness, all of this seems to have been preserved with care. Overall, my personal opinion is optimistic. The story of Gothic 1 Remake seems to faithfully honor the legacy of the classic while allowing itself to evolve as a modern RPG narrative. And if the full game delivers what the demo promises in terms of atmosphere, immersion, and narrative depth, we could be looking at one of the most successful remakes of the last decade. After playing the demo and following the trailers and reveals from Alchemia Interactive, I have to be honest, the gameplay is a curious mix of respect for the original and attempted modernization. And the result is something that has very positive points, but also leaves me with some legitimate concerns. The combat system has been completely overhauled, and in practice, it actually works better than the original for modern players. You can react to enemies instead of needing to predict every movement in advance, as happened in the 2001 game. In the demo, I noticed that the combat is slower and more tactical, which pleased me because it allows planning each attack, but I also felt that it is sometimes too much, with noticeable pauses between strikes that break the rhythm of the fight. One of the biggest improvements I noticed is that the game finally allows executing attack combos for those who are not beginners. It is just a matter of getting the timing right when pressing the buttons in sequence, and this was refined specifically in the second version of the demo after negative player feedback. This completely changes the experience. Because in the original prologue, I felt limited to one attack at a time, which made combat against multiple enemies truly desperate. Exploration maintained that classic, no hand-holding feeling that made Gothic so special. You can venture down unmarked paths and die instantly if you are not prepared, exactly like in the original. In the demo, the first challenge is simply finding a weapon, and even the weakest enemies kill you in seconds if you run headlong into the fight. This maintains the constant tension and danger that made the world so immersive. The new inventory system is much friendlier and more modern than the original, and smoother animations allow for quality of life actions like picking up items without needing to sheathe your weapon first, which makes a huge difference in gameplay fluidity. However, I felt a certain stiffness in the movements, especially in combat, and I hope this is refined before the launch on June 5th, 2026. One thing that worried me was noticing that I did not see the risk and reward thievery mechanism in the demo, which was so important in the original. You could steal items, but getting caught had severe consequences. And this mechanic added an extra layer of strategy to the game. I also felt that the demo is too short and limited, with only 15 minutes per segment and 5 revives, which does not really allow me to judge how the full 50-plus hour experience promised will be. The gameplay of Gothic 1 Remake has enormous potential. It maintains the challenge and sense of danger of the original while modernizing the controls and interface to current standards, but it still needs some adjustments to combat pacing and animation fluidity to be truly exceptional. If the final version delivers what the demo promises in terms of tactical combat, free exploration, and satisfying progression, we will have one of the most faithful and successful remakes of recent years. But I am still waiting to see if they can maintain this quality throughout the whole game. When I first saw the first trailers running on Unreal Engine 5, I confess I was skeptical. I thought it would just be another generic remake, trying to modernize a classic without understanding what made it special. After playing the demo and seeing more material released by Alchemia Interactive, I need to change my opinion. The graphics are simply impressive and managed to do something rare in a remake, which is to improve visually without losing the soul of the original. The heavy and oppressive atmosphere of the mining valley has been completely preserved, but now with an additional layer of immersion that only modern technology can provide. The shadows are deeper, the lighting is more dynamic, and every corner of the penal colony seems to hide real tension. In the demo, I spent a lot of time just looking around, admiring how the details of the environments, from the damp stones of the walls to the ragged clothes of the prisoners, were reconstructed with shocking care. What surprised me most was how they managed to maintain the dark and desaturated color palette that characterized the original, without letting the game look too pretty or colorful as many modern remakes tend to do. The world looks dirty, worn out, and dangerous, exactly as a place where prisoners are sent to die working should look. The characters also received a visual treatment far superior to the original. Faces have more natural expressions, dialogue animations are smoother, and even minor NPCs seem to have their own personality when you observe them in motion. In the demo, I especially noticed how the enemies, from corrupted prisoners to wolves and mutant insects, have designs that retain the essence of the original while gaining new life with high-resolution textures and more realistic particle effects. The vegetation, water, and particle effects are where Unreal Engine 5 truly shines. Seeing the fog moving over the mountains, the water from the springs reflecting ambient light convincingly, and the sparks flying when swords clash created moments of pure visual beauty in the demo that I simply could not take my eyes off. However, I have to be honest about a few negative points. The demo had some dropped frames during high action moments, and the system requirements rose considerably for the final version. Alchemia even increased hardware recommendations in April 2026 because the game became heavier than anticipated. This worries me a little because if the graphics already fluctuate on high-end machines, even in the demo, I imagine what players with more modest PCs will face. I thought the graphics of Gothic Remake are one of the biggest highlights of the game. They managed to honor the dark and unique aesthetic of the original while elevating the visual experience to a modern standard that few remakes managed to achieve. I will be direct from the start. The performance in the demo left me worried, and it is no small matter. Playing on a relatively modern card, I felt frame rate drops at specific moments, especially near waterfalls and in areas with many NPCs. And these stutters are not something I would expect from a game launched on Unreal Engine 5 in 2026. The problem is that even with high graphics settings and high-end hardware, the game does not achieve that fluidity we expect from a modern title. I saw a player complaining on Reddit that with an RTX 4090, they were stuck between 30 and 40 frames per second on ultra settings. And another with a 4070 Ti Super complained about getting only 33 frames per second on the Gothic preset. This is truly worrying when other games run smoothly on the same configuration. In my experience with the demo, the game ran well enough after making some adjustments, but it never became truly fluid. The anti-aliasing solution leaves images blurry, and performance is inconsistent in specific places, what we technically call iffy performance. What worries me most is imagining how it will be in larger cities when the demo already shows problems, even if minor, with a minimal number of NPCs. The good news is that Alchemia Interactive listened to feedback. More than 15,000 players responded to surveys about the demo, and the updated May 2025 version already brought faster animations and smoother interactions with the world and enemies. This shows that the developer is committed to improving. But I wonder if it will be enough to fix the Unreal Engine 5 optimization issues that seem to be systemic. The system requirements confirm my concern. In April 2026, the developer significantly increased the GPU and RAM recommendations for the final version, indicating that the game became heavier than initially predicted. To run at 60 frames per second at 1080p Ultra, you need at least an RTX 4060 Ti. For a fluid 1440p, you need an RTX 3070 Ti. And for 4K, you need an RTX 4070 Super or higher. This places the game among the most demanding of 2026. The issue of DLSS and frame generation is crucial here. Practically all UE5 games run smoothly only with these technologies enabled, and Gothic is no exception. With high-end hardware like an RTX 4090, without DLSS, the game stays at 3040 frames per second, but with DLSS enabled, the experience improves considerably. The problem is that playing with upscaling technologies should be optional, not mandatory to have a minimally acceptable experience. The current performance of Gothic 1 Remake is one of the game's biggest weaknesses, and although Alchemia has shown commitment to improving based on feedback, I have doubts about whether they will be able to optimize it completely by the launch on June 5th, 2026. If you have high-end hardware and do not mind using DLSS and frame generation, you should have a playable experience. But if you expect native fluidity without visual compromises, you will be frustrated, and players with more modest PCs will probably suffer quite a bit. My sincere opinion is do not buy at launch, wait at least a month to see full reviews and potential optimization patches. The demo showed huge potential, but the performance issues, especially the stuttering and FPS drops in specific areas, have not yet been fully resolved, and I have doubts about whether Alchemia will manage to fix everything before June 5th, 2026. The game is primarily recommended for fans of the original Gothic who want to relive the classic experience with modern graphics and more accessible mechanics. If you played the 2001 original and love that dark, challenging, and immersive atmosphere of the Mining Valley, this remake was made for you. It faithfully maintains the soul of the game while modernizing combat, interface, and visuals. For new players who never knew Gothic, the recommendation is more cautious. Play the demo first. It is available for free on Steam, GOG, PS5, and Xbox Series, and see if the old school, slow, and challenging RPG style is to your taste. The game does not forgive carelessness. Weak enemies kill you in seconds if you are not prepared, there are no quest markers on the minimap, and progression is deliberately difficult, which can frustrate players accustomed to more accessible modern RPGs. Fans of challenging open-world RPGs will also be pleased, especially those who enjoy games like Kingdom Come Deliverance, Mount & Blade, or the old Gothic 2. The remake offers over 50 hours of gameplay, 3 factions to choose from, with different progression, a living world with NPCs that follow independent routines, and boundless exploration that reacts dynamically to your actions. In my personal experience, the demo left me excited about the potential, but worried about optimization. The game is visually stunning, maintains the original oppressive atmosphere, and the overhauled combat actually works better than in the original, but the frame rate drops and the extremely high system requirements RTX 3070 Ti recommended for Fluid 1440p make me think twice before buying at launch. Will I buy the game? Yes, but not at launch. I will wait about a month to see reviews from those who played the full title, wait for optimization patches that will likely release fixes, and maybe pick it up on sale if the price drops from the $49.99 pre-order price. If you have high-end hardware, RTX 4070 Super or higher, and are a hardcore fan of the original, you can buy without fear, but for most players waiting, it is safer to wait.
Sometimes I ask where the stars have gone.